The moment Rayen was slapped in front of the entire hotel staff and thrown out onto the wet pavement, he still didn't regret helping Keanu Reeves. His uniform was torn, the rain poured like punishment, and guests walked past him as if he were invisible, but in his heart he knew he had done the right thing. Just 24 hours earlier, he had a job, a sick mother to care for, and no idea that a Hollywood legend would change everything. That night, while working the valet stand, a black motorcycle stopped in front of the hotel. Rayen stepped forward and froze. Keanu Reeves removed his helmet, soaked from the rain, and asked, "Can I park this somewhere safe?" Rayen knew the hotel had strict rules. Motorcycles weren't allowed near the staff zone, but looking at Keanu, humble and quietly waiting, Rayen made a choice that would cost him everything. He broke the rules, made a spot for the actor, and hoped no one would notice. But someone did. The next morning, Rayen was dragged into the manager's office, humiliated, and fired without mercy. As he walked away in silence, he didn't know that Keanu had seen everything and was already planning something that would shake Rayen's entire life. Rayen trudged home that evening, the weight of his dismissal heavier than the rain. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he didn't care to check. It was just another reminder of his sinking life. The streets were cold and deserted, a perfect reflection of how he felt inside. His thoughts raced. How would he tell his mother? How would he pay for her medicine? But then, as he walked past an alley, something unexpected happened. His phone buzzed again, this time more urgently. With a sigh, he fumbled for it and checked the screen. It was a message from an unknown number. "Meet me in 30 minutes at the back of the hotel. I have a job for you." Rayen stared at the message in disbelief. Who would reach out to him after what happened? He almost dismissed it, but something told him this wasn't just any ordinary message. He didn't know what to expect, but curiosity pushed him forward. He arrived back at the hotel, trying to act as if he belonged, though security eyed him suspiciously. The minutes dragged on, and just as he began to think it was a prank, he saw a familiar face step out of the shadows. It was Keanu Reeves. Rayen's heart skipped a beat. You sent that message?" Rayen stammered. Keanu nodded, his eyes serious yet kind. "I saw what you did for me. You didn't have to, but you did. And that says a lot about you. I want to offer you something, an opportunity." Rayen blinked, barely able to process the words. He had just lost his job. His life felt like it was crumbling. But here, standing before him, was the man he'd helped, and he was offering him a chance to change everything. Keanu handed him an envelope. "Open this in private. It's a life-changing opportunity, but it comes with its own risks." Rayen's hands trembled as he took the envelope, his heart racing. Was this a dream, or had fate finally given him a break? Rayen's hands were shaking as he gripped the envelope. The weight of it felt strange, like it was more than just paper. It felt like the weight of 1,000 decisions, 1,000 lives waiting to be changed. He glanced up at Keanu, still standing there in the dark, his face hidden beneath the hood of his jacket. "What do you mean by life-changing?" Rayen asked, his voice barely above a whisper, still trying to make sense of the whole situation. Keanu's gaze softened, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that Rayen had never seen before. "What I'm offering isn't just about money. It's about a chance to do something bigger than you ever imagined. But it's not going to be easy." He paused, as if trying to measure how much he could say. "You helped me when no one else would. Now I want to help you. But first, you have to trust me." Rayen didn't know what to say. Trust seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. After all, it was the very same trust that had gotten him fired. But something about Keanu's words, the honesty in his tone, made him wonder if this was his shot at redemption. Without another word, Keanu turned and walked into the shadows, leaving Rayen standing in the cold, still unsure of what to do. He stared at the envelope in his hands. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a decision. A risk. He could walk away and keep going down the same path, working low-wage jobs, scraping by and watching his dreams fade. Or he could take the chance, trust a stranger, and possibly change everything. His mind raced as he tore open the envelope, revealing a letter and a set of keys. The letter was short, written in Keanu's neat handwriting. The opportunity is yours if you're willing to work for it. Come to the address on the back of this letter tomorrow. Be prepared for anything. Ryan's heart pounded as he looked at the address. It was a building across town, a place he'd only seen in passing but never entered. The keys in his hand jingled like a promise, a signal that whatever was ahead would require him to step into the unknown. But even as excitement grew inside him, there was fear too. What if this was some elaborate prank? What if it led to something even worse? But deep down, Ryan knew he couldn't pass this up. He had nothing to lose. And for the first time in days, he felt something spark inside him, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, his life was about to take a turn for the better. The next morning, Ryan barely slept. The key sat heavy in his pocket as he stared at the clock, counting the hours until he could finally go to the address Keanu had given him. The day felt endless. He did his best to stay calm, but his mind was a storm of possibilities. What if it was all a joke? What if he walked into a trap? But the other option, doing nothing and watching his life continue to crumble, was worse than any risk he could imagine. As the afternoon rolled in, he grabbed his jacket, locked the door behind him, and made his way to the building. It wasn't far, just a few blocks from his small apartment. The area looked deserted, like the kind of place where dreams went to die. But this wasn't the time to back out. As he reached the front door, he noticed a small note stuck to the glass. It read, "If you want to change your life, step inside. But remember, this isn't about comfort. This is about growth." Ryan hesitated for a moment, but his hand was already on the door. He pushed it open and a blast of cold air hit him. Inside was an industrial space, dimly lit, with concrete floors and empty walls. There was no receptionist, no welcoming committee, just a man standing at the far end of the room. He looked to be in his early 30s, wearing a simple black suit. Ryan stepped forward, but the man didn't move. "You must be Ryan," the man said in a low voice. "Keanu told me to expect you." Ryan nodded, his throat dry. "What is this place? What do you want from me?" The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he handed Ryan a folder. Inside this folder are instructions on how to start. "Keanu believes you have potential, but before we go any further, I need to know if you're serious about changing your life. If you're ready to risk everything to put in the hard work, then we can begin." Ryan looked down at the folder in his hands, wondering what he was about to get into. He had already given up his job, his dignity, and his comfort. Was he really ready to dive into something completely unknown? The man's cold eyes never left his face, as if watching for any signs of hesitation. But Ryan didn't hesitate. This was it, the moment where everything could change, where he could either walk away and live a life of mediocrity or step into the unknown and give it all he had. "I'm ready," Ryan said, his voice firmer than he expected. The man's lips twitched into a small smile. "Good, let's get started." He gestured toward a small door in the back. "Follow me." Ryan followed the man through the narrow door, his footsteps echoing in the cold silence. Behind it was a small, sparsely furnished room with nothing but a table, a chair, and a large whiteboard filled with complex notes and diagrams. The man sat at the table, motioning for Ryan to take a seat. "This is where you'll begin," he said, opening the folder. Inside were several pages with detailed instructions, but also a series of rules. "Keanu has put his trust in you, but you have to earn it. This isn't a game, Ryan. Everything you've known, your life up until this point, it has to change. If you can't commit, you might as well walk out now." Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but this wasn't it. He thought he was walking into some kind of mentorship, but what was this? Was this about personal growth, or was it something deeper? His gaze moved over the pages. Tasks, challenges, interviews, meetings with people he'd never heard of. But the most surprising part was the last page. Your first challenge: prove your commitment, the rules, no turning back. You will give up everything you've known. You must leave your apartment, your friends, your family. No distractions. The choice is yours, Ryan. Ryan sat in stunned silence. Was this a test? He could barely keep his thoughts straight. Leave everything behind? His mother was sick. He was her only support. And what about his friends? They weren't much, but they were all he had left. The man seemed to read his thoughts. I know it's a lot, but if you want real change, real success, you need to let go of your old life. You won't be able to carry it with you. The words hit him like a sledgehammer. Everything he had worked for, fought for, it would be gone. Ryan's mind raced. Could he really do this? Could he let go of his past to grab hold of something unknown? But then he thought about his mother. How could he do this to her? How could he leave her with no one? His heart ached at the thought. But he couldn't deny the opportunity in front of him. What was the point of living a life stuck in the same cycle? He wanted more. He deserved more. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Ryan spoke. I'm ready, he said, though. His voice cracked with uncertainty. The man nodded as if expecting the answer. Good. Then let's begin. The next few hours were a blur. The man began outlining the steps Ryan would need to take. No more distractions, no more excuses. The real world would soon vanish. Ryan's life, as he knew it, was about to end. And what was on the other side? He had no idea. But one thing was certain. There was no turning back. Ryan followed the man through the narrow door, his footsteps echoing in the cold silence. Behind it was a small, sparsely furnished room with nothing but a table, a chair, and a large whiteboard filled with complex notes and diagrams. The man sat at the table, motioning for Ryan to take a seat. This is where you'll begin, he said, opening the folder. Inside were several pages with detailed instructions, but also a series of rules. Keanu has put his trust in you, but you have to earn it. This isn't a game, Ryan. Everything you've known, your life up until this point, it has to change. If you can't commit, you might as well walk out now. Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but this wasn't it. He thought he was walking into some kind of mentorship, but what was this? Was this about personal growth, or was it something deeper? His gaze moved over the pages, tasks, challenges, interviews, meetings with people he'd never heard of. But the most surprising part was the last page. Your first challenge: prove your commitment, the rules, no turning back. You will give up everything you've known. You must leave your apartment, your friends, your family. No distractions. The choice is yours, Ryan. Ryan sat in stunned silence. Was this a test? He could barely keep his thoughts straight. Leave everything behind? His mother was sick. He was her only support. And what about his friends? They weren't much, but they were all he had left. The man seemed to read his thoughts. I know it's a lot, but if you want real change, real success, you need to let go of your old life. You won't be able to carry it with you. Words hit him like a sledgehammer. Everything he had worked for, fought for, it would be gone. Ryan's mind raced. Could he really do this? Could he let go of his past to grab hold of something unknown? But then he thought about his mother. How could he do this to her? How could he leave her with no one? His heart ached at the thought, but he couldn't deny the opportunity in front of him. What was the point of living a life stuck in the same cycle? He wanted more. He deserved more. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Ryan spoke. I'm ready, he said, though his voice cracked with uncertainty. The man nodded, as if expecting the answer. Good. Then let's begin. The next few hours were a blur. The man began outlining the steps Rayanne would need to take. No more distractions. No more excuses. The real world would soon vanish. Rayanne's life as he knew it was about to end. And what was on the other side? He had no idea. But one thing was certain. There was no turning back. The following days were a blur of tension and rapid-fire decisions. Rayanne was thrust into a world of high-stakes business deals, surrounded by people who didn't care about his past or his struggles. They only cared about results. He sat in meetings where the air was thick with power plays, subtle insults, and calculated moves. The people he had to work with, Evan's colleagues, were ruthless, and they saw Rayanne as nothing more than a pawn in their game. But every time they tried to undermine him, to push him down, he felt something inside him snap. He wasn't the same scared, lost kid who had been fired from his valet job just a week ago. He wasn't going to let anyone control his fate. The task was to convince a group of potential investors to trust a new business venture, a risky one, that could either make them millions or leave them empty-handed. These investors were tough, cold, and cynical. They had seen it all. They didn't trust anyone, especially someone like Rayanne, who had nothing but a few weeks of training behind him. But Rayanne had learned something important during his days, of sleepless work and hard lessons. It wasn't about knowing all the answers. It was about knowing how to make people believe in you, to make them feel like they were part of something bigger. Every word he spoke in the meetings felt like a battle, every look from the investors like a test. But slowly, piece by piece, Rayanne started to win them over. He spoke with confidence, even when his heart pounded in his chest. He gave them a vision of what the future could look like, not just for their business but for their lives. By the end of the week, the investors were sold. They agreed to back the deal, to trust Rayanne and the vision he had sold them. It was a huge victory, but it came at a cost. The pressure, the sleepless nights, the constant battle to prove himself. It had all taken a toll. Rayanne felt exhausted, his body aching from the weight of it all. But there was something else, something deeper, that kept him going. The belief that this was his chance to prove himself, not just to others but to himself. When Rayanne finally returned to the small room Keanu had arranged for him, he collapsed onto the bed, barely able to keep his eyes open. But as soon as his head hit the pillow, his phone rang. It was Keanu. "You did it," Keanu said, his voice calm yet full of pride. "You proved that you can do what others thought was impossible. But this is just the beginning. You've earned your place, Rayanne. Now it's time for the next step." Rayanne swallowed hard, trying to gather his strength. "What's next?" he asked, his voice raw. Keanu chuckled softly. "It's time for you to face your biggest challenge yet, the one you've been running from your whole life." Rayanne's stomach tightened. He had no idea what was coming next. But one thing was certain. Whatever it was, it would test him like nothing before. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but he knew there was no turning back now. The following day, Rayanne was summoned once again by the mysterious man, Evan. This time, there was a different energy in the air. It was as though everything Rayanne had done up until now had been a warm-up for whatever challenge lay ahead. As he walked into the room, Evan was standing by the whiteboard, his expression unreadable. "You've done well, Rayanne," Evan said, his voice unusually serious. "But what's coming next is the final test." Rayanne's heart skipped a beat. He had faced challenge after challenge, each one pushing him further than he thought he could go. But this was different. He could feel it. The pressure was building, and this time it wasn't about business deals or convincing investors. This time it was personal. "You've learned how to win over strangers, but now you have to win over yourself," Evan continued. "The real test isn't out there, it's right here." He tapped his chest. "You need to confront the fears you've been running from your entire life, the insecurities that have held you back. Until you do that, none of this will matter." Rayanne stared at him, confused. Was this some sort of mind game? He had already sacrificed so much. His job, his comfort, even his connections with his family and friends. Now they were telling him to confront his fears. How do I do that? Rayan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Evan didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the desk and picked up a folder. He handed it to Rayan without a word. Rayan opened it, and his eyes widened. Inside was a series of photographs, each one of his mother, taken in the hospital, with an IV in her arm, her frail body weak from the battle with cancer. The images were painful to look at, and Rayan's throat tightened as he tried to hold back tears. Your mother is the key to your next step, Evan said softly. You've been running from the responsibility of taking care of her. You've been using this mission as an escape, as a way to avoid facing the reality of what you're truly afraid of, being the person she needs you to be. Rayan clenched his fists, his anger rising. How could they do this to him? He had already given up everything. He had pushed himself to the brink, and now they wanted him to face the one thing that had kept him up at night for years. But Evan wasn't done. You can't change the world if you can't even change yourself, Rayan. The question you need to ask yourself is, are you ready to face your fears head on? Or will you keep running? Rayan's mind spun, the weight of the decision almost crushing him. This wasn't just a business deal. This wasn't about success or failure. This was about confronting the person he had been avoiding for years, the one who had allowed his fears to dictate his life. His mind went back to his mother lying in that hospital bed, trusting him to be strong, to be the son she needed. Could he really step up and be the man he was supposed to be? Could he face the truth of his past and accept the responsibility that came with it? For the first time, Rayan didn't know the answer. But he knew one thing. He couldn't keep running. I'll do it, he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. I'll face whatever it takes. Rayan's mind was racing as he left the room. Evan's words echoed in his ears, haunting him. You can't change the world if you can't even change yourself. The weight of that statement hit him harder than anything else had in weeks. How could he have been so blind? He had been running from the hardest challenge of all, facing the truth about his own life, his own choices. But now there was no turning back. That night, Rayan took a cab to the hospital where his mother was staying. His heart pounded in his chest as the building came into view. The last time he had visited, he had been a mess, avoiding the conversation, making excuses, pretending everything was fine. But this time he was determined to be different. He couldn't afford to avoid her anymore. As he walked into the hospital room, the sight of his mother lying there, pale and frail, nearly brought him to his knees. She looked so weak, so vulnerable, yet there was something in her eyes that made Rayan stop in his tracks. Even in her condition, she still had that quiet strength, the same strength that had always gotten her through the toughest times. Rayan, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm so proud of you. Those words hit Rayan like a punch to the gut. He had been running, thinking he was doing everything for her, but in reality, he had been avoiding the one thing that could truly help her, being there for her, truly present. He sat by her bedside, holding her hand, the weight of his failure heavy in his chest. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, his voice shaking. I've been so caught up in this dream, but I haven't been there for you. I've let you down. His mother smiled weakly, the expression in her eyes filled with understanding. You're doing more than you think, Rayan. I know you're scared, but you have to know this is your time. I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about you. You have a future, a purpose. Don't let fear hold you back. Her words shattered something inside him. He had been hiding behind excuses, afraid of confronting the reality of his situation, afraid of facing his own failures. But now, sitting beside his mother, he realized that fear was the only thing that had been holding him back all along. The guilt he had carried for so long melted away as he promised himself that he would stop running. It wasn't just about the business deal anymore. It wasn't about success or failure. It was about being the person he was meant to be, the person his mother had always believed he could be. Rayan stood up, his heart finally feeling lighter. I'm going to make this right, Mom, I promise. She reached out, her hand resting on his arm. "I know you will," she whispered. "You always were stronger than you thought." Rayan left the hospital that night, but something inside him had changed. The fear, the doubt, the guilt, they were all gone. For the first time in a long time, he was ready to face the world head-on, ready to take responsibility for his own future and for his mother's. The next morning, Rayan woke up with a sense of clarity he had never known before. His mind was sharp, his heart focused, and the weight of his past no longer held him back. He had faced the hardest battle of all, his own fears, and come out stronger on the other side. Now, it was time to face the world, and he was ready. Rayan arrived at the office early, the same place where he had once felt like an outsider, unsure of his place in the chaos. But today, things were different. Today, he walked in with his head held high, a sense of purpose in his every step. Evan was waiting for him, but there was no challenge left. Rayan had already passed the most important test. "You're ready," Evan said, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "You've done the work. Now it's time to put everything into action. What happens next is up to you." Rayan took a deep breath. He knew what he had to do. This wasn't just about the business deal anymore. This wasn't about impressing Keanu or proving himself to Evan. This was about making the choice to live his life on his terms, to face whatever came his way with courage and strength. He wasn't running anymore. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, presentations, and hard decisions. But this time, Rayan wasn't afraid. Every challenge he faced, he tackled with confidence, trusting in the lessons he had learned and the strength he had gained. The investors who once doubted him now respected him. The business he was building flourished, and Rayan knew it was only the beginning. But even as his career took off, there was one moment that kept him grounded: the image of his mother, smiling at him, proud of the man he had become. Rayan knew he couldn't have done this without her belief in him. And just when things seemed to be falling into place, the phone rang. It was Keanu. "I've been watching your progress, Rayan," Keanu said. "You've done everything I asked of you. You faced your fears. You stepped up when most would have crumbled. I'm proud of you." Rayan's chest swelled with pride, but there was more. Keanu's voice grew more serious. "You've earned something more, Rayan. A place in something bigger than just business. You're ready for the next phase of your journey. But there's one more thing you need to do." Rayan paused, uncertainty creeping in. "What's that?" Keanu's voice softened. "You have to trust yourself completely. Let go of the fear, the doubts, and the excuses. Trust that the person you've become is enough. Because it is." Rayan smiled, his heart filled with gratitude. This was it, the moment where everything had come full circle. He had finally stepped into the man he was always meant to be. As the call ended, Rayan stood up, looking out the window at the city below. It was a new day, and the world was his to conquer. He had learned that true success wasn't about the money or the accolades. It was about believing in yourself, no matter the odds. As he stood there, ready to take on whatever came next, he thought of his mother, Keanu, and everyone who had believed in him along the way. He knew that this was just the beginning. The journey was far from over. Please subscribe channel for Keanu Reeves Respect Thanks. This concludes the story. I hope it meets your expectations. Would you like to start another story or make any changes?